It's about 21 and a half minutes past the hour. Dr. Paul's Family Talk on Impact Radio USA. Thank you for being with us today on this Wednesday morning, April 21st. And you know, Al, we have a couple of birthdays coming up, one today and one tomorrow, but we won't mention who they are. Well, I appreciate that. Although you can send cake to my office, I will accept that. Okay. Maybe we'll talk a little more on Friday, but I want to get to this interview now with Jim Campbell, a noted radio talk show host. Is coming out with a book. You can pre-order it now, but it's to be officially released next Tuesday, April 27th. The book is called Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. And as you'll hear during the interview, he bilked over 735,000 people out of billions of dollars and got away with it for a long time. So let's get to it right now. My interview with Jim Campbell. On the other end of our phone line this morning is an amazing gentleman currently living in Connecticut, as it says on his website, taking on Wall Street and Washington from the Radical Center, featuring interviews with leading figures from business, politics, and sports. Has his own radio show, Business Talk with Jim Campbell, and recently came out with a book, which will be our focus of the discussion today, Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. And this book comes out next Tuesday, and so we want you to get that. But let's bring him in right now, author and radio host Jim Campbell. Good morning, Jim. How are you today?
Good morning, Paul. Thanks for having us on. We set this up a couple months ago, so it's a great honor to talk to your folks. And I'll just add, the book is from McGraw Hill. They asked me to throw that in all the time.
Absolutely. You need to please the publisher at all times, don't you? I know how that works. Great to have you here. We talked a little off air. We're both football fans. You're originally from Chicago, so at least you got one Super Bowl under your belt. We're still waiting for a Super Bowl appeararance in Detroit.
It'll come, I'm sure. You got a new guy in there, new regime. It looks good. Things look positive there. Yeah,
for the first time in a long time, maybe like in 60 years, it looks like they have their acting gear. Probably the best coach they ever had, at least in my lifetime, was Joe Schmidt. Hall of Fame linebacker, became a coach, did a good job, but there was so much nonsense and politics behind the scenes. He said, you know what? I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And he left, and they've never been the same. But here we are. There's always next year.
Alex Karras era, they were pretty doggone good.
Yeah. Mid-'60s into the early 70s. And then again, they had a flicker in the early 90s with Barry Sanders, and just never made it. And never got to the Super Bowl, and one playoff victory since 57. But there's always next year, right, Jim?
Always next year. I'm from Chicago. Remember, the Cubs had 100. The Cubs had 108 next year.
That's right, but at least they finally pulled it off.
It's this is what I always look at, which is amazing. The Cubs did not win a World Series in my mother's entire lifetime.
Oh my gosh. That's tough. That's a tough way to go. Well, kids will be saying the same thing about my lifetime with regard to the Lions, but, you know, it is what it is. We still tune in every Sunday or go to half the games and enjoy it. So
that new stadium looks really nice, too.
It does, yeah. It opened around, I think, 2002, and it's state-of-the-art. It's a gorgeous facility as a facility for the fan experience, but also the field is just top of the line. And yeah, they have a great place. And of course, they hosted a Super Bowl there back in 05, 06 or so.
This is much more fun than talking about Madoff.
Absolutely. But we do want to talk about Madoff.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Your book, Madoff Talks. Now, I know you talked to Bernie Madoff's wife and son, and you had an email thing going back and forth with Bernie Madoff. But maybe just take us through this, because this still astounds me. I don't have your background in finance. I know you worked at Dean Whittier, an analyst at IBM. I didn't, so I don't have that as a background. But he was a highly successful businessman, but at the same time was running this Ponzi scheme and raking in billions and ripping people off, and they didn't even know it. So how did all this happen? How did he get away with this for so long with nobody having a clue what was going on?
You know, that's a great question, because one of the major reasons I wrote this book is because Bernie did not act alone. This was a full systemic failure. And what do I mean by systemic failure? I mean the regulators, his bankers, his Wall Street hedge funds that were sending money to him. He had 4 big investors who he called with me his big 4, and they basically extorted Bernie, the biggest of which took $7 billion out of the fund, probably 8 times more than Bernie ever stole. So we can go through the components, but the SEC blew it. His bank, J.P. Morgan, which had the account, didn't even know what business it was for. They thought it was for the legitimate business. Mm-hmm. And let me make a point on the legitimate business. He built from scratch the number 3 market maker. He was clearing trades for the likes of Charles Schwab. And they knocked down the doors of the New York Stock Exchange, broke the monopoly. He ended up the number 3 firm in market share, in volume, and the business alone, without the Ponzi scheme, was worth $3 billion. He ran it at ethics above the Wall Street norm, if you can imagine that, on the 19th floor of the Lipstick Building in New York City, which is a distinctive oval-shaped building, 2 floors down behind Lock and Key, which his own sons, who ran the upstairs business, did not have access to. He built a criminal enterprise side by side, $65 billion Ponzi scheme. So go figure.
Yeah. Now, is it your understanding that his wife and the rest of his family had no clue until it all came out?
Oh my God, you're asking great questions. I have to say, I have done, but I'm going to evade this. So you may not feel that way. I am the first media source that's taken a crack at, did the family know? Were they complicit in any way? Okay. I worked with the FBI, the trustee that ran the bankruptcy liquidation. They're all convinced that the family had to know, had to be in on it. I went on a deep investigation. First of all, getting to know Andrew and Ruth, I understood what their demeanor was around the time of the crime coming out and everything. And then I obviously went on my own independent investigation. There were some gray areas that really, really, really were hard for me to get under. And it's in chapter 8 in the book, and McGraw Hill is asking me not to give it away. But I hope folks will read it. And by the way, you mentioned finance background. The book is very fast-paced detective story-like. I think people will find out, A, they don't know as much anything about the whole true story that they think they do, and B, that they'll enjoy reading it just as almost a better than fiction kind of book.
Oh, I can't wait to get my hands on it next Tuesday for sure. Now, he wasn't just some guy in his basement running these billion-dollar situations. Wasn't he the chairman of NASDAQ, for goodness sakes?
Well, you've now locked on to one of the reasons he got away with it for so long. Okay. He was the chairman of the NASDAQ. He was the chairman of the DTC, which is the entity that validates securities, and obviously validating whether any real trading was going on would be a big thing. He had tremendous credibility, and as I just said, I kind of termed this, if you look at it in a mafia context, the front of the restaurant you want to keep clean, and you want to look like a regular, normal business. And then in the back, or in this case downstairs, you're running all your bad stuff. He had a tremendous image. And, there were people in the legitimate side who stayed with his business just because they were so impressed that he really did put customers first. And if you know Wall Street at all, that's not really necessarily the truth. He automated his systems ahead of the industry. He designed his systems so that the customers were ensured they were getting best price execution and that there was no front running by his trading desk. Front running means that the client order is, say, a buy, so you jump right ahead of it because it's how it's going to impact the market. Mm-hmm. That's what people thought he was doing. They did not know that it was a Ponzi scheme. They thought he was front running through his market maker. And so, yes, the cover really, really worked. At one time, he told me he was on the short list to be the chairman of the SEC.
Wow, I didn't realize that. Well, so he was highly and widely respected by all of the big shooters in the industry, right?
He was highly respected, and the hedge fund, he didn't even register with the SEC until 2 years before he got caught. So nobody even knew that he was in that business. The closest he would say was all he was doing was executing trades for commissions for hedge funds, which is what he was doing in the regular business. So somehow the SEC never even figured out that there was a 17th floor, much less that he was in a hedge fund business.
Holy cow. Is there any way to find out, or do you know, or can you say, did anybody in the SEC know about this and just turned a blind eye, or was getting something on the side?
No, as far as I know, they didn't. They were. If we went through the whole SEC story, you'd see how fundamentally incompetent they were and how they were silos in their organization that prevented them from having the right people. There's very simple tests to detect if there's a Ponzi scheme there, but the examiners were focused on brokerage business, which is a different way of testing for fraud there. So they didn't really know how to find it. Now, FINRA, which is the regulatory body for the industry, the self-regulatory body, and they sort of, the FCC sort of oversees them. He was chairman of them. And there's some sense from what I got from insiders that they did put, I don't know what the word is, let's say junior examiners on and giving him kind of a break. And just to show you, he was a very obsessive compulsive guy. His office looked like a Hollywood set. There were no papers allowed at the end of the day. Every computer had to be tilted at the same way. It was all black and silver. FINRA sent all their new hires over to Madoff's operation to see what the ultimate Wall Street firm looks like. So they were literally in bed with him. And by the way, this is even worse. When 9/11 happened, I believe it was the NASDAQ or the SEC branch, whichever one it was, actually housed their people temporarily in Bernie's office in Midtown.
Wow.
I forgot that story until you just yelled it out of me.
Oh, wow. Do you know, or can it be traced back to when this whole thing began, his first client/victim? Do we even know when it originally officially started?
I don't know where you got your question from. You're hitting every major point. This is one of the fundamental, along with being an epic systemic failure that most people don't know. The other thing is that you would assume, for instance, he's got this great legitimate business. Something happened. He lost some money and he made the gambler's mistake. Let's double down. I'll get the money back and then everything will be fine. Mm-hmm. And which, of course, as you know, never works.
Right.
I assume that was the case. So Bernie tells me this whole story, and lo and behold, he tells me that kind of a story. He told no one else this story, by the way. He waived his attorney-client privilege with me, and I went to his lawyer who'd been told a different story by Bernie. Mm. So I go and do all my independent research, and guess what? He was building it side by side from the start, just as he was with the legitimate business. And that is, just imagine how compartmentalized his mind had to have been to have built these side by side.
Yeah, okay. I didn't realize he started at the same time. I thought he became wealthy and successful and then thought, I could make a few more bucks here. So right from the very beginning, that was his plan.
Yeah, I don't know that it was a plan. I think that he got himself, going into the hedge fund business and trying to cover up that he was in it obviously showed that he wasn't comfortable with it being public. But what it comes down to psychologically is that the successful business, he was making commissions, right? Which means if Wall Street's up, Wall Street's down, you get your commission. The hedge fund business, right, is a money management business, and you cannot expect to make money all the time. First off, the market is, randomly up and down. And Bernie could not take a loss physically, psychically. And I think so very soon he said, oh, my God, this isn't as easy as I thought. And I'm having trades that are losing money for my clients. He couldn't bear losing money. And I think he got himself trapped in that. He couldn't get out of it. And I don't want to get into politics, but you may remember the last president had a psychological issue with accepting losing an election. And I think there's some similarity psychologically on that side. And they're both from Queens, New York, too, which I don't want to cast any aspersions on Queens.
Yeah, we probably should avoid politics, only because we'll be off and running and we'll never get back to your book. And we don't want to do that.
We don't want to do.
That's right. We're talking to radio host and author Jim Campbell this morning about his new book, which comes out next Tuesday, the 27th. Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history. And Jim Campbell, starting next Tuesday, how can our listeners get a hold of this book?
Okay, it's on Amazon for pre-order right now. After we were on the New York Post front page last week, it soared. It's not even available, obviously. It soared to #1 in all the finance categories. And if you'd let me do a brief promo, next Sunday, April 25th, we will be on CBS Sunday Morning show, and we're actually taping it at my home here tomorrow. So that might be fun, hopefully, for folks if they want to turn in. You can order it on Amazon and obviously Barnes and Noble, and it'll be at your local bookstores as well. And I just think that you'll learn a lot that you don't know. It'll be a fun read. And of course, Paul, I owe it to you for letting me come on for a few minutes.
Oh, no, we appreciate it. Now, how will this book come out? Obviously, I'm guessing hardcover. Will it be Kindle, audiobook, the whole thing? Or
it's coming out hardcover, and you'll get a kick out of this, right? Because you're in radio. I feel like I had a radio voice of some sort.
Yeah.
So McGraw Hill hires an outside company to produce the audio book, right? So
Yeah.
I said, well, why can't I do it? And they said, okay, we will let you audition.
Yeah.
I sent my tape. I sent my tape in, and one day later they rejected me. They're using professional actors. That'll be out in 6 months, and I don't know about the Kindle.
Okay. I've heard that a lot about the industry. Very few authors can actually narrate their own book. They just won't let them do it at a certain level, right?
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate because I was kind of looking forward to it, but
Yeah.
I don't have any power over that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I read somewhere, either read or heard during the research for this interview, you had lunch at some point with Bernie Madoff's wife, and at the end of the lunch, she suspected you were either a media person or a spy or doing some kind of undercover work, and you were just trying to get information, right?
Let me say, I had a lot of lunches with Ruth. We had a long-term relationship. And by the way, you've locked onto another thing. We're doing 2 B-roll walks on the Sunday morning show, and that story is going to be one of them, assuming if it makes the final cut. Mm-hmm. But yeah, she came into the restaurant. We were in the middle of winter. She had sunglasses on, which she wore at the beginning of the meal. She didn't take them off. Oh, wow. And then we had instant chemistry, and she was very open, very attractive. She ordered a chef's salad, which she ate as if she hadn't been fed in a month. Oh, wow. And so everything is going great. We walk out the front door, and I said, Ruth, can I get a picture of us? She stops, and she goes, "You're wired, aren't you?"
Oh, boy. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had to email Andrew, right, who was the one that had set the lunch up, and tell him, I guarantee him, I know I was not wired.
Yeah. Well, trying to put myself in her position, let's say she knew nothing about this. Can you imagine the level of devastation that hit her when my husband did what? And he's been doing it for how long?
Listen to this. I mean, she lived with her sister in Florida after this went down. Yeah. Her sister and her husband were wiped out of every dime, such that they had to drive a limo service to the airport to survive.
Oh, my goodness. And they had been reasonably wealthy before that?
Yes.
Yeah, and they lost everything because of Bernie Madoff.
Because of Bernie Madoff, Ruth's own sister.
Yeah, and I saw, some of the other devastation that came from that. I believe one of his sons committed suicide not long after it came out, and the other one passed away from.
Yes, Andrew would describe it to me as this way: his father killed his son quickly and him slowly. Yeah. Mark died. Get this: 2 years to the exact day that his father was arrested.
Oh my gosh.
I'll give you another story, which will give you chills probably, but yeah. Madoff's secretary, on the legitimate, just totally honest, she's driving home at 6 p.m. with a headache in a limo service because the first day that this came up, and of course everybody's trying to get their money out. She gets a phone call from her daughter, Sabrina, and Sabrina had worked as an intern at Bernie's firm and was the same age as Andrew and Mark. And she said, "Mom, Mark is not going to be able to handle this. He's going to kill himself." And 2 years later, he did.
Yeah. Did he know anything about this? Do we know if he knew anything about this, or it was all a shock?
You're trying to get that out of me again, aren't you? I'll say that I found Andrew and Ruth to be very high character people. Yeah. The book will show you the gray areas, and there's some things that are not pretty. Ruth was at one point charging about $50,000 a month on the corporate credit card. That has nothing to do with whether she would know it was a Ponzi scheme, but it's a private firm. It's his money, supposedly, but it does tend to show that they use the business as a piggy bank.
Yeah, I believe that. I'm trying to think of the sentence. As I recall, it was the maximum allowed under law, which was 150 years. Do I have that right?
His sentence was 150 years.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I remember watching Jay Leno on late night TV at the time talking about that, and I don't remember the details. I don't know if it was a plea deal or he gave up the right to a full trial, whatever. Let's just go ahead and sentence me and I won't name other names. Is that how that came down?
Yeah, his decision was, his lawyer said, Bernie, you can negotiate a plea, and we can string this out, for as long as we can to keep you out of jail. And Bernie said, "No, I don't want my family going through this. Ruth won't be able to take it. I'm not going to turn my staff in. I'm not talking." And he never spoke, and that's why they gave him 150 years. If you look at his staff, who they ended up in a months-long trial, most of them got only 2 years for what the nature of this crime. So it shows you that he bamboozled his own staff.
Yeah, I think that was the gist of Jay Leno's joke. I mean, he made a joke about everything, but it was basically how bad must it have been if you're willing to accept 150 years and just walk away. Jeez.
Do you know how much? It was amazing. He ran through his that bank account which held the Ponzi money, $170 billion. I think I calculated that was like 59th GDP in the world for a country.
That's how much money ran through the company?
That's how much he ran through the basically the checking account over all the years. Meaning you know how Ponzi schemes work. Money's coming in, it's going out. You got to have more coming in than going out. So you're running continuous money through there.
Now, didn't he, as part of his sentence, have to repay over $100 billion? And if so, was he ever even able to do that?
No, because they stripped him of everything.
Yeah.
They left Ruth with $2.5 million, of which $500,000 went to lawyers at least. And of course, people will say, "Well, she got $2 billion out," Yeah. But she gave up $100 million to the Justice Department. They were worth $800 million at the peak. The $3 billion is the value of the business if it had sold at the market rate.
Okay, so she basically lost close to everything. I mean, yeah, $2 million, but when you're used to living the high life, and $2 million is.
It was amazing. Yeah. It was amazing to me having being with Ruth and how well she took it. And she was driving an old beat up car now that had dents in it. She had to submit every receipt of any expenditure over $100 to the trustee. So her life was circumscribed, and obviously all that glamour, pretty much disappeared. And it didn't. She seemed to just go right on.
Now, she is still among the living. Is that correct?
She is among the living. Lives here in my hometown.
Yeah, I thought she was still around, but of course, both of her sons are gone. Now her husband is gone. He just recently passed away too, from kidney failure. Is that what finally did him in?
Yes, he'd been sick for a while,
yeah.
And the timing is kind of eerie with the book coming out. She's pretty much she was dating him since the age of 13 and had literally cult-like devotion to him.
Well, yeah. So her entire life basically was wrapped up in him and her relationship with him.
Exactly.
And to find out all of this came down years ago, whether she knew about it or not. And I know you're not going to answer, so I won't ask again. We'll find out when we read the book. But just what a devastating experience for everybody. And you mentioned $170 billion went through the account, but is there a way to know the number of people who lost either everything or quite a bit along the way?
16,000 in the U.S., 720,000 abroad.
Oh my goodness! I had no idea it was that huge.
And we're talking a lot of charitable entities as well. My university, Tufts, lost 20 million with them. It was about an 85% Jewish affinity crime. Jewish folks getting affected.
Okay, mostly people he knew or had access to, or friends of friends.
It was initially a lot of people he knew, and then the feeder funds, which were hedge funds that were bringing funds to him. In other words, finding an investor and then sending his money to Bernie. That's where the bulk of them ended up coming from, which meant he didn't necessarily know the individual investors anymore, but obviously he worked with all the hedge funds.
Right, but there was a connection. Like, for example, I could not have invested with Bernie Madoff. Most likely, I didn't have any connections to him.
Yes, that's true, and that's part of the thing was everybody tried to get into it. And in every different way that they could. Bernie kind of just sat back and put it in the bank.
Yeah, what an amazing story. Amazing in terms of the level of devastation to so many people and so much money, but also just an incredible story to understand how this went on for so long, and very few people knew about it. The head of NASDAQ.
Yeah, it's just incredible. The SEC had 5 separate investigations and cleared him on every one.
And that's just basically because of their level of incompetence at a certain level?
Level of incompetence. What he did, the way the SEC was structured was, as I said before, if you're on the investment advisory or the money management side, you're in a separate examination silo than the broker side. Since he covered up that he was even in that business, they only put the broker guys on him. They had no idea how to uncover a Ponzi scheme. And here's another thing. Bernie controlled 100% the communications when they were on site. He didn't let anybody else in the firm talk to him. And obviously, no CEO on Wall Street does all the interaction when the SEC sends in these junior level examiners. The other thing was the whole manufacturing process on the 17th floor was fake reports. For the SEC, they took the fake reports and faked them again to hide the Ponzi scheme and make it look small, because you have to register as an investment advisor above a certain level. So what his right-hand man, we call the chief fraud perpetuating officer, Frank DePascali, only had a high school education. He ran circles around the SEC every time they showed up.
I'll bet, yeah. Well, why didn't the SEC demand to talk to various people on his staff, just taking Bernie's word for it, essentially? Why did they do that?
Yeah, it's one of the amazing things about Bernie's innate, whatever it was, but he didn't brook dissent. He didn't brook questions. You could ask this, well, why did the hedge funds never ask him what he was doing? The hedge funds were not allowed to do any real due diligence to really ask him questions. One, the biggest U.S. one, he gave them scripted answers to the regulators. He would not let his sons ask questions. He would not let anybody, and how he got away with that is just an amazing part of the story. For instance, the SEC is allowed to ask for documents within 5 years, and they have to be turned over in a day, right? You have to have them right with you or right near the office. And he would sometimes not do it, sometimes make up the reports. Sometimes they'd catch him in lies, in contradictions between different days they were there, and they never seemed to pursue it. He knew, for instance, they could have brought him down in 5 minutes, by the way, because the DTC has to clear every trade, and it's where they post collateral, et cetera. So they know if the trades are real or not, and they traced the legitimate business, every single trade through there. The investment advisory never had one trade go through there. So you make a 5-minute phone call. He gave them his account number, which was 0646, and they never called.
Yeah, I think I remember reading that somewhere. That's incredible, too. And I wonder whatever happened to those people at the SEC. Are they still employed?
That's another one of the things that's kind of disillusioning about the whole thing. 8 people, I think, were penalized. No one was fired.
Yeah. That would have been my guess, just because government agencies tend to, whatever, Bill, you had a rough day, just try it again tomorrow.
I mean, they were genuinely humiliated.
Yeah.
And the Inspector General's independent report just destroyed them, and they obviously didn't try to censor it or anything. They tried to release it on Labor Day weekend, Friday night, but they did. It is very, very damning. And they were humble. They now handle Ponzi schemes pretty well. They're still not set up necessarily to be a proactive cop, but on the Ponzi side, they know what to do. Harry Markopoulos, who was also a source for the book, was the big whistleblower they refused to listen to. They listened to him afterwards, and they have all the signs now of how you look for a Ponzi scheme.
Well, that was going to be my next guess. Basically, this probably can never happen again, at least not within the next several years, right? Because people know what to look for.
Actually, not necessarily.
Okay.
Ponzi schemes are being started all the time. Harry feels, for instance, that an offshore one could still pull this off. And, there'll never be one of Bernie's scale again.
That's what I meant.
But, if you take the way I don't know if you followed Robinhood at all, but it's a high, it's very hot right now, and all these individual investors are flowing into it. And what it's teaching them to do is pure gamble on the market. You see, they've run up almost like pump and dump these terrible stocks like GameStop, and everybody throws their money into it. People have no idea what they're doing, all individuals, right? Mm-hmm. And it's because Robinhood calls this free trading. They offer free trading, but they make their money through what's called payment for order flow, which is they direct the trades to the various exchanges that will give them the most rebate for directing the business there. Okay. Bernie practically invented payment for order flow and never abused it. Robinhood was taking so much money that the customers were getting inferior prices, such that they paid $34 million more than if they were paying commissions at a competitor. Now, the SEC did sanction them for that. But I think this is the kind of thing that they need to get on right away and maybe shut them down kind of thing. As you know, they're going very strong. They're very hot. But it's basically screwing their customers and teaching their customers that you try to make money by gambling in the market, which is always a loser's folly.
Oh, yeah. That very seldom works for anybody, especially the casual investor. They have no clue what's going on.
Exactly. They don't even know what these companies do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Fine. Well, we've been talking to a radio host and author this morning, Jim Campbell, about his new book, which comes out next Tuesday, April 27th, and you can pre-order it right now. The book is called Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Untold Story Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History. And he had an email relationship with Bernie Madoff, met with his wife several times, and other members of his family. So there's a lot of investigation that went into this, a lot of questions that were asked and answered. And Jim Campbell, how can our people get a hold of this book starting right now, right?
Amazon.com, and you only have to type in Jim Campbell or Jim Campbell Madoff, and it will come right up at Amazon, and that's the best place to get it. Right now, they are actually doing the second printing before we even launch because there was some demand coming out of the New York Post article last week. So they're going to try and move the delivery schedule as soon as possible. If you've already ordered early, they're going to be shipped on the 27th.
Okay. All right. Very good. And we do want to give McGraw Hill a plug, correct? Another one?
Very nice. Okay. McGraw Hill has been very supportive of this book. They made me cut 50,000 words, but they did let me double what was in the contract.
Well, that's good. Well, if they made you cut 50,000 words, maybe there's a book 2 down the road. How about that for an idea?
At one point, actually, let me tell you something seriously. There's 2 conspiracies the government never even chose to pursue out of this. One of them, which is domestic tax evasion. This was, especially for his big investors, this was really a tax evasion scheme. And there's been no criminal charges on them ever. The other thing was the international feeder funds were really fronts for money laundering. They were sending in money from corrupt oligarchs in Russia, Eastern Europe, and drug lords out of Colombia. And the money laundering wasn't looked into, and neither was the domestic tax evasion.
Well, there you go. You might have a book 2 and a book 3 down the road.
I might get killed on the money laundering side, though. Which is not even a joke. I mean, I know. Folks who looked into that were told to keep out of that. Yeah.
I looked into something years ago at a much, much lower level than you're talking about, and I was told fairly quickly by people who surprised me by telling me, don't ask any more questions, pretend you didn't see anything, or bad things are going to happen. And okay, well, that's a different story altogether. So at that level, I can't even begin to imagine, but then again, I can.
It's an endlessly fascinating story, Paul. It even amazes me, and I've just spent years on it. I started talking with Bernie 12 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I believe it. It's a comprehensive work. And I forgot the author's name, but he was hired by a publishing company to write the definitive book on Frank Sinatra. And he did. He took, I don't know how many years. And he showed up with 800 pages. And they said, wow, that's a huge book. And he said, well, that's the good news. Because the bad news is I'm only halfway done. So they negotiated, okay, write a book 2, and another 800 pages came out, and that's where I got my idea. Jim Campbell might have another book about Bernie Madoff.
I was even told that there were maybe 4 books in it, but I don't believe anybody wants 4 books on this stuff.
Well,
so this will. Yeah.
I don't know. You never know. This is something we've never seen before, as the casual American citizens. Whether it's going on before or not, we just didn't know. So I think it's a very fascinating story to a whole lot of people, don't you?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Now, before we let you go, and we'll turn back to your book again before we let you go, what's going on with your radio show? Maybe put a plug in for that as well.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I actually also do a crime show called Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, and then there's Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Mainly, I'm in trouble from my producer right now because we're not doing enough new shows because I'm so into this one. Fortunately, now there's so many interviews. We will probably play your interview on either Forensic or Business Talk as we start to, show some of the media interviews on the show itself, just because I don't have a chance to do a lot of new stuff right now. But as I'm sure you feel, I love doing radio. It's a great medium, and I have all the freedom in the world to cover whatever I want. And I like to, just like you've just done now, I like to do deep dives and things, not just some superficial soundbite 2-minute deal and move on. So I get a chance to do that in my show, too. I'm also the assistant news director at WGCH Greenwich, which is the local station here in Fairfield County and Westchester County, Connecticut, and New York, which I also enjoy doing.
Wow, very good. Well, my daughter lives not too far from you. She's in Fairfield, so maybe if I'm over there, I'll hit you up. And
Fairfield is about as far as the signal goes. Now, obviously, WGCH.com plays everything. But my daughter went to Fairfield University.
Well, there you go. They're only there for another year or so. He's in her husband's in the Coast Guard, so he'll have to move around at some point. But
Coast Guard School is up in New London.
Yeah, very good. Well, it's been great to talk to you this morning. Jim Campbell, radio host, and the author of the new book that comes out next Tuesday, although you can order it right now, and we want you to do that. Madoff Talks, uncovering the story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history. And to me, one of the most fascinating stories ever, at least in my lifetime, maybe along with whatever Richard Nixon did back in the 70s, the impeachment then. But just a fascinating story, Jim Campbell. And before we let you go, how about one more time telling our listeners how they can get a hold of your book today?
But right before we do that, your mention of Nixon is also interesting because Bernie, in these long letters, it was Nixonian compulsion to explain. You could just feel the intensity. The book is on Amazon.com and under Jim Campbell Madoff or Madoff Talks, which is the name of the book. And it's been a real honor, and I've really enjoyed being on your show, Paul.
Okay, I have too, and feel free to come back anytime. We've enjoyed having you. And radio host and now author, Jim Campbell. Go out there and have a great day. We'll talk again soon.
Same to you. Best of luck.
Thank you. Noted talk show host Jim Campbell. We want you to get his brand new book. You can order it right now. It comes out officially next Tuesday. Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history. So check it out, and check it out now before the official release next Tuesday. And we think you can also go to CampbellBizTalk.com, by the way, if you want to check Jim Campbell out a little more and hear more about his radio show. And we thank Jim Campbell for all of his time on today's show.